When Jasmine Crockett walked into the room, the world didn't just watch. It held its breath. The air was electric, thick with anticipation, cameras flashing like a storm of lightning across polished marble floors. Delegates from every corner of the globe paused mid-step. Journalists whispered into microphones, and the murmurs of anticipation rippled through the vast conference hall. Every eye was on her, every lens trained on the woman who had become a symbol of courage, justice, and relentless integrity. At the far end of the hall, George Soros stood beneath a halo of scrutiny, his gaze sweeping the room with the practiced confidence of someone used to controlling narratives. Yet even he paused, subtly adjusting his tie as if sensing that this encounter was unlike any other he had ever experienced. There was an unspoken tension, a silent recognition that this was more than protocol, more than optics. This was a collision of ideals, of influence versus authenticity, power versus principle. Crockett's entrance was a study in composed determination. Her steps were measured but commanding, her posture radiating the quiet authority that had carried her through years of challenges, courtroom battles, and public scrutiny. Every flash from the cameras seemed to underscore the weight of the moment, illuminating her face not as a politician, but as a messenger of truth in a world starved for it. The hall's hum grew into a collective holding of breath as delegates instinctively leaned forward, journalists poised with pens and recorders, and security subtly tightened around the edges. Soros, the embodiment of global influence, now met eyes with Crockett, and in that instant, an invisible current passed between them, a recognition of stakes so high that every word, every gesture, would carry consequences far beyond the walls of this conference center. Whispers spread through the crowd, questions hanging in the air. What would she say? How would he respond? Could one voice in a room so dominated by power and wealth shift the narrative, spark conversation, ignite change? The answer seemed to hover on the edge of reality itself, ready to break the silence. And then she opened her mouth. But what she said next left even the most seasoned attendees stunned. The conference hall was a constellation of power. Delegates from dozens of countries filled the seats, their attention divided between whispered negotiations, polished speeches, and the constant hum of global media. Leaders of nations, heads of multinational organizations, and influential financiers mingled under crystal chandeliers that reflected both wealth and gravitas. It was the kind of room where decisions could ripple through economies, shape policies, and alter the course of countless lives. And yet, amidst this carefully curated spectacle, one figure stood apart not because of titles or wealth, or historical influence, but because of the authenticity that seemed to radiate from every step she took. Jasmine Crockett's presence shifted the room's dynamics subtly but unmistakably. She was not a billionaire, not a career lobbyist, not someone whose words were measured by spreadsheets or political calculations. Her authority came from experience, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to justice and equality. While George Soros represented decades of financial influence and strategic maneuvering on a global scale, Crockett embodied courage rooted in lived reality, in the struggles of everyday people, and in the tireless fight for principles that could not be bought or brokered. Every conversation paused as eyes followed her. Delegates whispered about her record, her speeches, her reputation for confronting power with precision and poise. In a room accustomed to deference, her mere presence demanded attention. She had come not to flatter, not to negotiate, but to challenge, to illuminate, and to remind the world that leadership is measured not by accumulated wealth, but by moral clarity and the courage to act. The stakes could not have been higher. Discussions in the preceding hours had touched on fragile democracies, rising inequality, and social unrest. Decisions made here would influence policies that affected millions: healthcare, education, economic reform, and the very fabric of international governance. Every leader present was acutely aware that one misstep could cascade into global consequences. Against this backdrop, Crockett's voice carried the weight of accountability and truth, a stark contrast to the polished rhetoric that often dominated such forums. Whispers of anticipation began to circulate. What will she say? Will he respond? Can one speech change the tenor of this entire assembly? Even the journalists, trained to report without bias, could not hide the excitement, sensing that a moment was forming. A moment that might redefine expectations of leadership, courage and moral authority on the world stage. Each camera lens seemed to lean forward as if anticipating history being written in real time. Every detail amplified the tension. The subtle nods between advisors, the murmured consultations, the hush that fell as Crockett moved closer to the podium. The contrast between her human authenticity and the calculated influence around her was palpable, a visual and emotional tension that the audience felt deep in their collective consciousness. It was a cinematic tableau of principle meeting power, of truth confronting authority, of courage daring to challenge the weight of decades-long influence. And as the first words were about to leave her lips, as every eye remained riveted, the room seemed to hold a single shared breath. Little did anyone know this meeting would become a worldwide sensation. George Soros had long been a figure both admired and reviled, a man whose name alone carried weight in boardrooms, parliaments, and media cycles around the world. To some, he was a visionary philanthropist, a strategist who sought to stabilize fragile democracies and promote human rights. To others, he was a puppet master, a symbol of unchecked influence and opaque networks of power that shaped economies and policies far beyond public scrutiny. In every sense, Soros represented the apex of global authority, wealth, intellect, and a capacity to move entire nations with the subtlety of a master chess player. Born into hardship and shaped by the traumas of war and oppression, Soros had risen through a world that demanded cunning, resilience, and foresight. His financial acumen had made him a legend on Wall Street. His philanthropic initiatives earned headlines, and his involvement in international political discourse had drawn both admiration and fierce criticism. Yet behind the public persona lay a man whose influence was as precise as it was pervasive. Decisions were calculated, every move weighed against potential outcomes, every statement designed to advance strategy while minimizing exposure. In the corridors of global power, he was both revered and feared, a figure whose presence alone could shift the balance of any conversation. Soros's reputation carried its own gravity in the conference hall. Delegates adjusted their schedules, journalists prepped their questions, and even seasoned diplomats measured their words in anticipation of encounters with him. To many, he was untouchable, an orchestrator of change whose track record suggested that few could challenge or surprise him. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to control, his gestures measured, his tone calm but commanding. Every interaction was an exercise in precision, every glance a subtle assertion of authority. And yet the very qualities that had propelled him to prominence also made him predictable. The world had studied his patterns, his rhetorical style, his public maneuvers. He was brilliant, undeniably so, but his brilliance was rooted in calculation rather than spontaneity. This made him a formidable opponent in structured debates, in controlled environments where influence and preparation reigned supreme. What he could not anticipate, what few could leverage against him, was authenticity, an unfiltered, uncalculated force of conviction that arose from lived experience and moral clarity rather than strategy. That authenticity was precisely what Crockett embodied. Unlike the carefully constructed networks of influence and optics Soros relied upon, Crockett's authority came from the courage to act, the resilience to endure scrutiny, and the ability to connect with people on a human level. Her reputation was built on truth spoken in moments that demanded it, not on financial leverage or media manipulation. Where Soros projected a controlled global scale of power, Crockett radiated immediacy, presence, and relatability. It was a contrast that created a tension no amount of strategy could fully anticipate. Delegates sensed it instinctively, the juxtaposition of influence and authenticity, wealth and moral clarity, calculation and conviction. In the coming encounter, the stakes were more than symbolic, they were ideological. Could a single voice grounded in principle rather than power pierce the carefully constructed aura of influence surrounding a figure like Soros? The room seemed to lean forward collectively, waiting to see whether tradition, experience, and strategy would hold, or whether truth, courage, and authenticity could redefine expectations on a global stage. Soros himself remained composed, as he always did, but a subtle tension lingered beneath the surface. He had faced countless speeches, countless arguments, countless challenges, yet something about Crockett's presence hinted at unpredictability, a quiet force that could unsettle even the most seasoned of observers. Every advisor around him noted it, Every camera caught the micro-expressions that betrayed just a hint of curiosity, of recalibration. In that charged atmosphere, it was clear that the encounter would not be ordinary. The power he wielded so effortlessly would soon meet something intangible, a moral authority that refused to bend or be negotiated. And behind the polished suit and global reputation, Soros was about to witness something unexpected. Jasmine Crockett's journey was not one defined by wealth, privilege, or inherited influence. It was forged in the quiet crucible of perseverance, sacrifice, and an unshakable commitment to justice. From her earliest days, she had learned that courage was not a moment, it was a habit. She had grown up watching communities struggle under the weight of inequality, observing the disparities in education, healthcare, and opportunity. Those experiences did more than shape her worldview. They instilled in her a resolve to act, to intervene, to ensure that the voices of the marginalized were heard and respected. Her path into public service was neither linear nor easy. Each step demanded resilience in the face of setbacks, and she confronted obstacles that would have daunted lesser individuals. Early in her career, she had taken cases that others avoided, defending those whose pleas were too often ignored. Lawyers warned her of the risks. Colleagues questioned whether the battles were worth the toll, yet she persisted, guided by a principle that truth and justice were not negotiable, that the right path was not always the easiest. With every courtroom victory, every legislative initiative she championed, she built not only a record but a reputation for integrity, courage, and unwavering moral clarity. Her advocacy extended beyond the courtroom and the legislature. She immersed herself in the communities she served, listening to parents, students, workers, and neighbors whose struggles rarely made headlines. She celebrated victories with them and grieved setbacks alongside them. Every speech she gave, every policy she championed, was informed by these lived realities, and in each interaction she displayed a rare authenticity, a quality that made her not just a representative, but a beacon for those who believed that leadership should reflect the lives of the people it served. Crockett's journey was also marked by personal sacrifices. She endured scrutiny, criticism, and attacks that were often unfair and relentless. The public spotlight could be unforgiving, yet she maintained composure, her focus unshaken. Friends and allies would later describe her as someone who carried the weight of responsibility, lightly in demeanor but deeply in conviction. Even in moments of fatigue or doubt, she refused to compromise her principles. Her moral compass was not guided by expedience or popularity, but by an internal standard that demanded courage, dignity, and truth. Along the way, she faced confrontations that tested both intellect and resolve. Opponents tried to derail her with mischaracterizations, misdirection, and political maneuvering. Yet each time she met adversity with clarity and poise, turning attempts to undermine her into opportunities to highlight principles, elevate discourse, and reaffirm her dedication to justice. These experiences, each a trial by fire, honed her ability to speak with precision, act with confidence, and remain grounded even when the stakes were extraordinary. Her victories, both large and small, were proof not only of competence but of character. Landmark legislation she helped pass improved access to education, strengthened protections for vulnerable communities, and advanced equitable opportunities in ways that resonated far beyond her constituency. Each success was celebrated not as a personal triumph, but as validation of collective effort, of the idea that leadership is measured by impact rather than acclaim. Crockett's ability to inspire came from her authenticity. She did not seek attention. She demanded accountability. She did not wield power for spectacle. She wielded it to lift others. The combination of empathy, intellect, and moral courage created a presence that was magnetic and disarming at once. In any room, she could command attention without raising her voice, influence decisions without resorting to intimidation, and reveal truths that others often overlooked or avoided. Every encounter, every victory, every challenge had shaped her for a defining moment. She had faced scrutiny, navigated complexity, and endured trials that would have broken many. And yet she emerged not hardened but honed, stronger, wiser, and more prepared than ever to meet the pressures of global scrutiny with clarity, courage, and dignity. Everything she had endured had prepared her for a moment like this. The room seemed to shrink the moment Jasmine Crockett approached the podium. The chandeliers above cast a polished glow across the polished marble floors, reflecting the flashes of cameras that punctuated the tension like distant thunder. Delegates straightened, journalists leaned forward, and the hum of whispered conversations faded into near silence. It was a quiet so charged that even the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Every gaze was drawn to the subtle dance unfolding between two forces. One, the embodiment of global influence. The other, the living symbol of integrity and courage. George Soros rose slightly from his seat, a measured nod acknowledging Crockett's presence. There was civility in the gesture, the kind that comes from decades of navigating protocol and power. But beneath the polished exterior, there was a flicker of calculation, a micro-shift in posture as if noting that this meeting might not follow the script he was accustomed to writing. Soros's eyes, sharp and discerning, tracked her movements, the confident steps, the measured breathing, the quiet assurance that came from knowing her own worth. In the world he dominated, where influence often outweighed morality, Crockett's presence was a puzzle, one that refused to be solved with strategy alone. Crockett stopped a few feet from the podium, allowing the weight of the room's gaze to settle around her. She offered a brief nod to Soros, acknowledging him with the respect due to a figure of his stature, but there was no deference in her eyes. Instead, there was clarity, an unspoken assertion that influence does not equate to authority over truth. Cameras captured every nuance, the slight tension in Soros's jaw, the way delegates unconsciously mirrored her stance, the whispered exchanges among advisors who sensed that a spectacle was about to unfold. The body language alone spoke volumes, telling a story of contrasts, one built on calculated power, the other grounded in unwavering principle. As Crockett approached the microphone, the murmurs in the room became a collective intake of breath. Observers leaned closer, not wanting to miss a single syllable. Questions lingered like smoke. What will she say? Will he acknowledge her perspective? Could one voice in a room so steeped in influence and historical weight truly shift the dynamic? Each person present felt the tension differently, some with hope, others with apprehension, all with curiosity that bordered on suspense. Even the journalists, trained to observe without interference, felt the weight of the moment pressing against the objectivity they tried to maintain. Cameras panned, capturing the subtleties, a half-raised eyebrow, the slight shift of weight from one foot to another, the tightening of hands on the edge of the podium. These were the cues that spoke louder than words, the silent prelude to a dialogue that promised significance far beyond the hall itself. The contrast between Crockett and Soros was undeniable. One wielded influence like a shield, honed over decades of global maneuvering. The other carried conviction like a sword, tempered by personal experience, resilience, and a commitment to principle. Every observer instinctively understood that this was not a simple exchange of pleasantries. This was a collision of worlds, a meeting where authenticity would confront authority, where moral clarity would test calculated control. Whispers softened to silence, the room collectively holding its breath. Every flash of a camera, every scribble of a note, every subtle glance across the table heightened the anticipation. The tension was almost unbearable, a cinematic pause stretching across the audience, the delegates, and the cameras alike. The world seemed suspended in that moment, waiting for the first word to shatter the quiet, to signal the beginning of an encounter that would be remembered for years. And then, with a calm that stunned the room, Crockett delivered her first words. Jasmine Crockett's voice filled the hall, measured and unwavering, carrying a weight that transcended the opulence of chandeliers, the polished wood, and the flashes of cameras. She began slowly, deliberately, letting each word land like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples across the room. We are at a moment where the choices we make define not just our nations, but the very character of humanity, she said, her eyes sweeping the audience, capturing journalists, delegates, and even the most seasoned political veterans alike. The murmurs that had settled into a tense quiet now hung in the air like electricity, charged and expectant. Her speech was precise, yet its resonance was profound. She spoke of justice not as a concept to be debated in committees, but as a lived reality demanded by those who had been overlooked, marginalized, or silenced. Every sentence drew a contrast between privilege wielded for influence and courage wielded for the common good. Power without purpose is hollow. Wealth without responsibility is empty. Influence without accountability is dangerous. But truth, integrity, and moral courage, They have the power to change the course of history. Each phrase landed with deliberate weight, the cadence sculpted to let the audience feel each syllable as both a challenge and an invitation. Crockett's pauses were as strategic as her words. She let the silence speak, allowing the audience to absorb the gravity of her message. The delegates shifted in their seats, whispering under their breath. Cameras lingered on faces frozen in thought, expressions caught between curiosity and the dawning realization that the speech was unlike any they had witnessed at such a forum. Soros, the embodiment of decades-long calculated influence, sat forward slightly, a subtle tightening of his posture betraying a shift in perception. He had seen countless speeches, countless arguments, countless appeals, but here was something uncalculated, raw, and undeniable. She spoke of equality as both a principle and a responsibility. We must ensure that the systems we build reflect the humanity of all people, she continued, her tone unwavering, her gaze holding even those who are accustomed to measuring discourse in spreadsheets, projections, and power plays. When we uplift the most vulnerable among us, we elevate everyone. When we fight for justice, we build resilience. When we stand for truth, we inspire hope. Her words were simple, yet their effect was monumental, echoing in the minds of those present long after they had been spoken. The hall reacted, subtle at first, a soft murmur of approval, a head nod here, a brief whisper of agreement there. Then the murmurs grew louder, an undercurrent of recognition, admiration, and awe that spread like wildfire. Cameras captured the moment as delegates turned toward one another, exchanging glances that said more than words ever could. The applause began tentatively, then swelled, rolling like thunder across the room. Some stood, some clapped quietly, some wiped away an unexpected tear. The collective energy became almost tangible, a current that pulsed between every attendee, amplifying the impact of every sentence Crockett delivered. Her speech was not merely performative, it was catalytic. Each phrase carried weight beyond the room, calibrated to resonate with millions who would soon witness the moment through screens, feeds, and social media. Journalists typed furiously. Hashtags were born in real time, and video clips began circulating instantly, sparking debates, praise, and admiration across the globe. The story was not just a speech, it was a viral testament to courage, a demonstration of leadership rooted in principle rather than power, authenticity rather than calculation. Soros's subtle transformation was unmistakable. His usual composure, honed over decades of strategy and negotiation, softened as he leaned forward, listening intently. There was curiosity, yes, but now tempered with admiration. He nodded ever so slightly at points, a recognition of the weight and precision of her message. What he had perceived initially as a formality or ceremonial speech had revealed itself as something far greater. A challenge to the assumptions of influence, a reminder that leadership is measured not by control but by courage, and that true authority comes from the ability to inspire and mobilize with integrity. The room, once a stage for global deliberation, had become a theater of awakening. Delegates shared glances, whispers of agreement or contemplation passing quickly across rows. The journalists, now energized, captured every nuance, the way Crockett's voice resonated in the hall, the subtle expressions on the faces of those in power, the cadence that made every line memorable. Social media began to reflect the momentum immediately. Clips were shared, trending hashtags multiplied, and commentary exploded online. Individuals, influencers, and leaders began posting reactions, admiration, reflection, and even challenge, all validating that the moment was extraordinary. Beyond the confines of the room, Crockett concluded with a crescendo that was both calm and devastating in its clarity. Let this be the moment we remember, that justice cannot be delayed, equality cannot be compromised, and our responsibility to one another cannot be ignored. We are accountable, not just to history but to the generations who will inherit the world we shape today. The words landed with gravity, an invisible imprint on the hearts and minds of everyone present. There was no grand gesture, no flourish, just the quiet power of truth spoken with unwavering conviction. By the time she finished, the world had already started talking. The instant Jasmine Crockett's words left the podium, the room erupted, not with chaos but with a charged, reverberating energy that seemed to pulse through every attendee. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling into a tidal wave of recognition and admiration. Delegates exchanged astonished glances, Journalists typed furiously, and cameras continued to capture every reaction, hands raised, nods of approval, some eyes glistening with quiet emotion. But the true scale of the moment would not remain confined to the marble halls and crystal chandeliers. Within minutes, social media became an inferno. Clips of her speech were shared, retweeted, and reposted across platforms. Hashtags like #Crockett Speaks, Justice in Action, and Year's Global Moment began trending, slicing through digital noise to reach millions of viewers worldwide. Influencers, commentators, and thought leaders weighed in, amplifying her message with commentary that ranged from admiration to analytical breakdowns of the speech's political and moral significance. The initial spark had ignited a wildfire. The ripple effect was immediate and undeniable. International coverage followed swiftly. News outlets in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas dissected the speech, praising its clarity, courage, and resonance. Headlines described it as a defining moment, a rare instance where a single voice cut through layers of power, wealth, and established authority to demand accountability and inspire hope. Analysts debated its potential impact on global policy discussions, while citizens across continents celebrated the authenticity and moral courage Crockett represented. It was not simply a speech, it had become a global event, a narrative that transcended borders. The impact was both symbolic and practical. For ordinary citizens, Crockett's words offered validation, a reminder that one individual's courage could disrupt entrenched power dynamics. Social media feeds overflowed with personal reactions. Teachers inspired to advocate for equity, activists emboldened to organize, young leaders reminded that integrity and conviction could command attention on a worldwide stage. Memes and discussion threads proliferated, blending levity with admiration, humor with moral reflection, creating a cultural echo that extended far beyond policy debates. Even the delegates, accustomed to scripted speeches and measured rhetoric, found themselves unsettled and inspired. Some revisited their notes, reconsidered positions, and debated privately the implications of what they had just witnessed. Soros himself, previously composed and measured, remained quietly reflective, a subtle acknowledgement that the force he had observed was neither performative nor fleeting. The speech had shifted dynamics in ways that could not be immediately quantified, and the undercurrent of change was palpable. Visuals of the moment circulated relentlessly. Shots of citizens watching from cafes in London, university students sharing clips in Tokyo, families gathering around laptops in Lagos. Each image reinforced the global resonance, underscoring that Crockett's message was not confined to an elite hall of power, but belonged to everyone willing to listen, reflect, and act. The cinematic rhythm of these reactions, the spontaneous applause in distant cities, the quiet nods in living rooms, the impassioned tweets, created a narrative of collective awakening, of shared recognition that leadership grounded in truth could command attention anywhere. The speech also reverberated across political and media landscapes. Columnists dissected her phrasing, commentators debated its implications, and even opponents acknowledged the precision and power of her delivery. It was rare, almost unprecedented, for a single address to provoke this degree of sustained attention and cross-cultural resonance. And while some questioned the potential consequences or challenged specific points, the overarching acknowledgement remained unanimous. Crockett had transcended ordinary discourse, delivering a message that demanded reckoning and reflection. Within hours, the hashtagged clips had multiplied into a digital archive of inspiration. Citizens, politicians, and media personalities alike began sharing moments that resonated personally, illustrating how the speech had sparked conversations, motivated action, and reminded the world that moral courage could be as influential as wealth or institutional authority. Ordinary voices amplified the impact, sharing their own stories and creating a networked chorus that extended the speech's reach far beyond what any conference hall could contain. The shockwaves were unmistakable. What began as a powerful speech within a single hall had cascaded into global consciousness, challenging traditional hierarchies of influence, redefining expectations of leadership, and inspiring ordinary citizens to believe that integrity, courage, and principle could command attention on the world stage. The moment had become a movement, a reminder that change often begins with one voice, one message, one act of unwavering conviction. But beyond the applause, a deeper message had begun to resonate. In the quiet that followed the storm of applause and viral acclaim, Jasmine Crockett allowed the weight of the moment to settle. She did not speak to impress, to dominate, or to score points in a game of influence. She spoke to remind the world of a truth that had been lost amid the clamor of politics. Power and prestige, courage, dignity, and the commitment to truth are forces more enduring than wealth, more persuasive than authority, and more transformative than strategy. She reframed the encounter not as a contest between personalities, but as a lesson for humanity. Leadership, she said, her voice steady yet tender, is not measured by titles, by influence, or by the reach of your wealth. Leadership is measured by the courage to do what is right when it is hardest, by the integrity to act in service of others rather than oneself, and by the resilience to stand for justice even when the world watches with skepticism. Every eye in the room absorbed her words, sensing the clarity that only experience tempered by principle could bring. Crockett's message extended beyond the walls of the conference hall. She spoke to young leaders, to citizens disillusioned by cynicism, to those who had been told that influence required compromise or submission. Each of us has a voice, she continued, and each voice carries power. Not the power of domination, but the power to inspire, to challenge, and to transform. Speak even when it is inconvenient. Stand even when it is uncomfortable. Lead even when no one else will follow. Her words resonated like a clarion call, stirring something dormant in the hearts of everyone present and every viewer who would witness the speech online. The moral clarity of her message was reinforced by the context of the encounter itself. Standing before George Soros, the embodiment of decades-long influence and calculated authority, Crockett's courage became the lens through which the audience understood true leadership. It was not the mastery of systems or accumulation of wealth that commanded attention. It was authenticity, integrity, and a willingness to confront challenges with unshakable principle. The contrast illuminated a universal truth. Dignity and courage cannot be negotiated, and moral authority can reshape even the most entrenched hierarchies. Across social media, the resonance of her words amplified. Ordinary citizens shared reflections on how the speech inspired them to act, to advocate, and to engage with their own communities. Thought leaders and commentators noted that the encounter had sparked a global conversation, not just about policy, but about values, character, and responsibility. Crockett had transformed a single moment into a movement, reminding the world that the power of one voice can ripple into countless lives, challenging assumptions and creating possibilities that no ledger or balance sheet could measure. Her closing reflections crystallized the lesson. We are all accountable, to our communities, to our neighbors, to history itself. What we say, how we act, and the integrity with which we carry ourselves shapes not just the moment but the future. Courage is contagious. Dignity is magnetic. Truth is unstoppable. The hall held its breath. The applause had faded, but the weight of her words lingered, reverberating across minds and hearts alike. And in that moment, the world understood what true leadership looks like. Jasmine Crockett's encounter with George Soros was more than a meeting between two influential figures. It became a defining moment in modern leadership. One voice, grounded in courage, principle, and authenticity, had pierced the layers of protocol, wealth, and influence to remind the world what truly matters: justice, dignity, and the unwavering commitment to truth. Across continents, millions watched, shared, and reflected, proving that one individual's courage can spark conversations, inspire action, and challenge even the most entrenched systems of power. The global reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Social media erupted with admiration. News outlets dissected her words, and ordinary citizens felt a renewed sense of possibility. What Crockett achieved in those moments was not merely applause, it was connection, validation, and empowerment. She demonstrated that leadership is not defined by position or title, but by the ability to act with integrity, to speak fearlessly, and to elevate others through example. Now, the question passes to each of us. How will we respond to this call for courage? How will we ensure that truth, justice, and dignity shape the communities, workplaces, and nations we inhabit? This is your invitation to participate, to amplify voices that matter, and to carry forward the principles Crockett so powerfully embodied. If her message moved you, share it. Discuss it. Reflect on your own role in shaping a more just and equitable world. Subscribe to follow stories that celebrate courage and truth, and join a community inspired to act, to challenge, and to uplift. Because moments like these remind us that leadership is not a position, it's a responsibility, and every voice matters. The world is listening.